welcome to Off My Shelves, and in this episode we're going to be looking at Scott Pilgrim, the colour hardcovers by Bryan Lee O'Malley, volumes 1 to 6, and yeah, we'll get underway. So Scott Pilgrim, if you're ever after a book that's very light and breezy and funny and charming, then Scott Pilgrim is the one. Basically, if you're a bit done with, you know, hard brooding superhero stories and you want a bit of a change of pace, then Scott Pilgrim is a perfect antidote to that, really. These volumes are produced by Oni Press and they are stunning books in every way. Each comes with its own kind of different cover and colour coordinated as well. They all got their own colour coordinated bookend pages with a different character from the series on each cover, with number 1 being our main protagonist, Scott Pilgrim himself. The binding on the books is all uniform throughout, and on the back of each books it goes through one by one the actual antagonists of the story, Ramona's ex-boyfriends. But before we get too far into that, my first exposure to Bryan Lee O'Malley's work actually came from a different book, which I'll show to you quick actually. It came with this book, Seconds. So I'm one of the few really who didn't read Scott Pilgrim first with Bryan Lee O'Malley. My first Bryan Lee O'Malley book was Seconds, and this is a wonderful little book really, slightly smaller but slightly wider as well than the Scott Pilgrim hardbacks. But this is really good, and I adored the nice, bright, colourful world that they painted in this. And so when I had the opportunity to delve back into the work of Bryan Lee O'Malley through Scott Pilgrim, I decided to pick up volume 1 and volume 2 together and then get sucked into Scott Pilgrim really. And just for those who have never heard of Scott Pilgrim, there is a film out as well, which is fairly true to the graphic novel series really. But either way, Scott Pilgrim is a Canadian living in Canada, and the book is really about him and his friends coming of age, going into their 20s, not really knowing who they are, what they want to do, anything like that. But then Scott actually searching actively to find his one kind of love in life. But also he is probably one of the stupidest characters in literature history really. He hasn't got much brains, but what he lacks in brains he makes up in just brute force and strength, because he's an amazing fighter, which is a good thing really, because part of the main story of the book is him having to fight. Now he meets a girl called Ramona Flowers, and she has a league of evil exes. On the backs of the hardcover you get numbering 1 to 7 of the evil exes. To be with Ramona Flowers, Scott has to go through all 7 of her evil exes and defeat them all, and each one of these evil exes is a totally unique character, very different in style of fighting, in appearance, in everything. They're all very unique. Each of these large-scale fights with the exes is one of the main kind of features, if not the big main event in each of the volumes. Though they are the antagonists, and pretty much in each volume Scott faces off against 1 or 2 of these kind of evil exes, they are almost, after the first volume or 2, kind of just a slight side track really, because the main basis of the story is Scott actually growing up really and finding himself, and then essentially becoming a better, more well-rounded person. But the same goes for the cast at large, you know, the other people in his band, Ramona herself, all of them are in this kind of really precarious point in their lives where they all have to grow up essentially, and they don't want to. But the brilliant thing about these books is just the little attention to detail, which I just love those little kind of flares of attention to detail really. Now every now and again you get a bit of text in the panel saying a name, like here, like Scott Pilgrim, 23 years old, rating awesome, you know, and it introduces them in a bit of a different, more unique way. Like when you go around Scott Pilgrim's house, which is not his house initially, it's his mate Wallace's house, and Wallace is his friend and they share a bed together, and it's a really wonderful little relationship they've got going on really. It even kind of marks out, you know, Scott and Wallace's apartment ownership diagram, and it tells you what Scott owns and what Wallace owns, which is essentially 1 or 2 things of Scott's. Everything else is Wallace's. Even when you're introduced to his band Sex Bomb, you basically get a rehearsal session from them. But again, Bryan Lee O'Malley decides to go the extra kind of mile and actually puts the lyrics to the song here along with chords. And if you didn't play guitar and need the chords themselves, then the chords are actually there. You slowly but surely in the first volume get introduced to this wider cast of friends. It is very much looking at the characters and being amused by their world, really. And I can even tell you down to the exact panel that I started to really fall in love with Scott Pilgrim, when I realised it was full of humour and warmth and niceness, really. Not long after he gets a glimpse of Ramona Flowers, he tries to search her out and goes to a party and tries to describe her to people there to ask if she's there. And that's the panel that I knew I liked it. He says to a person at the party, okay, this might sound vague, but do you know a girl, one with hair like this? And he puts his fingers down like that. And the guy in the next panel said, oh yeah, you mean Ramona straight away. It didn't make you laugh out loud, but it's just a nice pace and a nice entertaining read really throughout. And the artwork is just sublime by Bryan Lee O'Malley. Now I never read the black and white versions originally, because originally it was printed in black and white. I've only ever been exposed to the colour versions, and the colouring in general is superb on every level. Obviously, as you might have guessed from looking through the book slightly and from seeing a few other bits, it has got this fantasy element, and what I mean by that is this world is littered with these kind of video game references in life and in every way, really. And so when a fight starts, for example, the fight isn't a normal kind of punch and pushing fight. It is a full video game fight with, you know, flashing, jumping, swords, and even when he destroys the enemy, they explode into a whole whirlwind of coins and he picks them up. And so, yeah, it's very much kind of written by a person who clearly grew up in the 90s and clearly loved video games and would walk around Canada fantasizing about real life being a video game. I think the best way to describe this book is a real story and a real kind of, you know, look at someone in their 20s coming of age, but then whenever they come up against any conflicts, the conflicts themselves are hyper unrealistic and video game like. Everything else is fairly realistic, you know, they have relationships, they go out, they have parties, but then when anything of conflict comes into it, or anything really extreme comes in, it then morphs into this video game realm, really. And again, and the video game quality comes massively into play in those big, large-scale fights with the evil X's, really, where, you know, loads of different things happen. And again, I wouldn't want to kind of spoil anything by going through every single volume of this book to spoil the story for you, because it is very much one long story. The chapters even continue throughout each book, so when you start at chapter 1 in volume 1, you actually go right the way through to the end of the book and you get to chapter 38. So it is literally all one long story of Scott Pilgrim and Ramona Flowers and Scott Pilgrim's friends, all in this really hyper unrealistic kind of reality, but then hyper boring reality. And there's just loads of little humorous bits as well, like in various points, like Scott will wake up and someone will ask him to do something and he will get distracted on his phone, and then the next panel will be night time and that person coming home and he hasn't done anything and he hasn't got a clue what's going on. And it's all this type of kind of silly humour, but certainly if you want a nice, easy, really entertaining, pleasant read, then these are perfect, I think. And part of the reason that I was attracted to these in the first place was the art of Bryan Lee O'Malley, and it really shines through in all of these volumes. And for my money, the art does certainly get better and better and more diverse, and he tries out little experiments by changing the art, or even in this case now the colour versions, changing the colour palette slightly and doing little tricks here and there with the panel layout, which really works brilliantly. And again, he lets the art and the visuals do most of the storytelling, which is what you want really from this format. You could probably quite comfortably read all 6 of these volumes pretty much within an hour, possibly an hour and a half. That's how quick and breezy and easy a read they are, really. But this is very much a light-hearted look of life, really, and life in Canada and modern life. So if you are, you know, in your 20s or 30s and you play video games and you like music, then you're going to get a lot of kind of references from this, and and you're going to get a lot from it, really. And certainly if you've watched the film before and you want more of the story, then this is great, because this very much delves into the backstory that the film doesn't. In between all the main story, you get flashbacks to Scott in his youth, other past girlfriends, backstories of other characters, and this really fleshes the world of Scott Pilgrim out far more than the film. So if you did like the film, which how could you not? Edgar Wright films are amazing. And luckily now, for anyone jumping onto the series, is you can get the colour versions in paperback in various forms. I think one comes in a box set, and there's individual volumes for the colour version as well. I think they come in 3 individual volumes for the colour paperback versions that are out now, collecting 2 of these in 1 paperback, and they'll probably be a bit easier to get than the hardbacks, which are proving a little bit difficult to get, I think, for some people. The last thing I'll say on these as well is the extras. In each book comes extras, and the extras are fantastic in every way, because Bryan Lee O'Malley takes you through his process, takes you through preliminary sketches, even extra little deleted scenes and extra cartoons and things like that. He'll show you a lot of his process, like by taking reference photos of things around Canada and things in his daily life that he used as reference for the book. But I've gone on far too long about Bryan Lee O'Malley, Scott Pilgrim. Hopefully you've enjoyed having a look at this book series, and thank you very much, and I'll catch you on the next one.